Hello, my fellow educators. My name is Keith West, and I'm a high school teacher for grade 9 students, reading in English, and former 19-year high school coach who believes that telling stories is a way to connect with others. My student population appears to be a little more diverse than the overall school population. Most of my students are compliant and know that learning has a causal relation to their success. However, the challenge I've discovered lies deep within the psyche, the world of intrinsic motivation. So that's where the idea of the project came from. I wanted to focus on improving student engagement and student relationships when it comes to reading. My 9th grade students require an additional focus on skill building, which I work to incorporate in everyday instruction. Working with the ILC director, I selected age and Lexile appropriate fictional texts to introduce my students. Based on the reading abilities of my students, one requirement was that the Lexile level of all the texts was under 1,000. The goal of my project was to pair fictional texts with nonfiction articles from Newsela. To model this, I selected The Story Girl by Jamaica Kincaid, and I paired it with the Newsela article on French colonialism in the Caribbean. This article served to provide my students with the necessary background information that increased their overall understanding of the text. Now, from there, we embarked on a literature circle unit. Students were allowed to pick from the following texts: The Hunger Games, Trapped, and The Hate U Give. Once students read the first third or so of the novels, I gave instruction on how to identify topics the author is addressing. We did this by having whole group discussions in which I would talk with the students about what was happening in the novel leading up to when the action started. So this is called the inciting force, and then it sets forth the main conflict that the storyline will solve later in the novel. When students were able to tell me that when Khalil was killed by a police officer in the early parts of Hate U Give, the students then replied, "Mr. West, this story is about police brutality and the use of force to maintain order." Students were able to use these discussions to identify key terms to search on Newsela. For The Hate U Give, one of the identified search criteria was police brutality, police use of force, or words to that effect. We had similar discussions in each literature circle, and students worked to identify key topics, which they used to pair the fictional text with related nonfiction articles on Newsela. This was the big shift in students accepting Newsela and getting more interested because they were able to form connections between classroom texts and events in the real world. Students continued pairing text with Newsela articles for 4 weeks. To track student engagement, I created a Google Forms survey that I asked students to complete in October 2020, November 2020, and February 2021. In the survey, I had the students respond to statements like, "I enjoy reading fiction," "I avoid reading," and "Newsela is a different type of reading resource that I am open to doing more of." By having students complete the same survey throughout the course of the year, I was able to quantitatively track their results. When reviewing the results of my survey, it is important to keep in mind the entrenched academic motivations and attitudes towards school and reading, as well as the history of struggle these students have had with school. A small improvement in engagement or approach to reading is a huge victory in my class. Through conversations with my students throughout the course of this project, I learned that by giving them the autonomy to select their own Newsela articles to pair with the fictional texts, that led to an overall increase in student engagement and attitude about reading.